Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. So glad you're here. So it's interesting I'm in this seat because I am a creative leader and have that background, and I think it's going to give me a lot of insight into what these three go through every day. I have note cards. Hopefully I won't be staring at them the whole time. I don't know why I agreed to be moderator here, because I was in freak out mode, but now I'm good. So if I just sit here and look stunned, put your hands up and say, you can do it. So as creative leaders, I'm sure most of us can agree that most of us, we weren't given formal training for that, right? We went to design school or learned to be really great writers and amazing at our craft, but as we rose the ranks for our careers and became experts and put into these leadership roles, a lot of what's defined us really as being doers and the best at our craft, all of a sudden we're thrown in the position of being mentors, right? And it's replaced with needing to mentor, inspire, wear an HR hat, make hires, do performance reviews, and then become accountable for this team that rolls up to you and inspire them to do their best work. So today, what we're going to do is talk about inspiring the team, leaning into your team to create the best work, and what being a creative leader means to you. So introductions, I know that overall the team was introduced, but I'd like them to kind of go down the line and just talk about who they are, where they work, who they lead, what their team feels like on a day-to-day, and we'll start with Jeremy.
So before you introduce yourself, those microphones, those two microphones are not to feed. Can you just hand that one microphone for me?
Okay.
Awesome.
Sweet.
All right, how's everybody doing? Can you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
Oh, sure. Who are you? Who are you? And where do you work? A little bit about your history, and talk about your team and who you lead and kind of your day-to-day, just so we get to know that a little bit.
So I'm Jeremy. I work for GSW in the Polaris area as a pharmaceutical advertising agency. I lead a group of designers, and for the most part, our role is to support larger teams with creative directors, writers, strategists, etc., to not only launch brands but also do day-to-day support to those brands, which is a really fun collaborative effort and environment and help things get done.
Mm-hmm. And then your background, falling into this position, what did you go to school for, and how did this come to be?
My background, going way back, I grew up in Puerto Rico. I came here when I was 17 years old. But I remember always being really inspired by the mural movement and art and the culture in general in the island. And that was something that really played a role in how I behaved in the creative environment with the kind of work that I do and how I treat people. I got a scholarship to attend CSCA, turned down one at Pratt Institute and a couple of other schools, but this was my alma mater, I guess I would say, regarding advertising and design. CSCA. Right after CSCA, I went to work for Hallmark Cars in Kansas City, doing environmental design, and got to meet some phenomenal artists there that really inspired me to attack every project in a non-traditional way. I mean, they really believe in experimentation for every project that you do. And you will see artists painting with toothbrushes or twigs, and just really trying to develop really unique ways of connecting with people emotionally through art. And I think that really, I was able to bring that into GSW here in Columbus, after I relocated here.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you. Okay, so Kelly, same with you. Kind of talk about your role at Root and what that means, a little bit, how it's hitting you now being part of a newer startup in town.
Yeah. I am. Okay. All right, that's okay. I'm Chief Brand Officer at Root. I've had a career of agency in-house, and I'm back on the in-house side. I apparently spent about a decade in each of those phases. I oversee 4 departments at Root. Root Insurance Company, we are a startup based here in Columbus. We're 4 years old. I was telling these guys I was employee number 80, and we just hit 700 last week. So I don't know when you're not allowed to be a startup anymore, but we might have crossed that line. The 4 departments I oversee are creative, integrated marketing, product design, so the teams that are actually designing the screens within the app, and internal communications. It's funny, as you go up in creative leadership, all the kind of random departments that no one knows what to do with, they lump under brand, design, creative, so that's how I have internal comms. My background is editorial. I started my career writing for magazines in New York, and as Danielle said, the majority of my time in New York was spent at Martha Stewart Living. I feel like I got to cut my teeth on one of the most interesting brands of our time. I was there before, during, and after her little stint in jail, so which she referred to as Yale. And I feel I got to watch a company kind of on its way up and in this really interesting time, and then come out on the other side with a totally different business objective and approach and team and even work that was coming out across every different channel. And I think that's what then propelled me to come back to Columbus and work at Ology.
Along that same tangent, do you feel a big difference between the agency world and the startup world, and how your role has kind of changed in your day-to-day?
Yeah, Antonio and I were just saying about how hard it is to sell work from an agency to a client. It's somehow even harder internal. I think the biggest challenge of being at a startup is really understanding that the best creative work, what we in this room would define as the best creative work, doesn't always perform. And at a startup, especially in these early years, performance, in my case, gaining customers, is not of utmost importance. It's the only thing that matters. And so there's this forever tension that bad creative sometimes performs. And how can you constantly be tweaking that? And how can you fit in moments of good creative that will hopefully endure and push the brand for the long run, but still you have to hit these numbers. You have to create work that hits these numbers every day, or there's no department, there's no company.
So Antonio, just a little bit about yourself and your role, and talk about the team that you lead.
So I'm an associate creative director for RGA, and I work inside of a department called brand transformation. And what that really does is a combination of business consultants and brand consultants. We all come together and we help define a transformation for a company. So we've done this for places like Verizon or PepsiCo. We recently launched Bubbly, which you guys may have heard. And that was actually an endeavor of them trying to understand how they can break into a market and get rid of a leading competitor. So I lead a team of verbal and visual designers. I co-lead that team, and we basically are doing a lot and just basically trying to understand how we can take some of our creative thinking and systematically create a bunch of systems for companies to be able to take that forward and continue to develop their products or their organization or even some of their departments. And my role, interestingly, I actually came to CCAD, but I started here as a fine artist, which is so funny. It's quite different from what I do. Who would think that somebody who's going to just paint naked people all day is actually going to go out and develop brands for Fortune 500 companies? But that's actually some of my background. But I literally take that to heart, because there's something about being true to your craft and really caring about a lot of the details and making sure you want not necessarily everything to be perfect, but you have something you want to express, and there's a certain type of message you want to put forth in some of your work. And I bring that to a lot of the ways that I lead and some of the work that I actually deliver.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to dive into creative leadership a little bit. I think as you rise the ranks, you find yourself in a lot of meetings, and you're at the table with a lot of other high-level people in the company that you work at. And my question for you is, what defines a good creative leader? How is your role differentiated from someone else who might have a high leadership role at your company? And what's your job as a creative leader that you see when you're in these meetings with people who are in different facets of the business? How do you find your role in leadership might be different than theirs?
It's a good question, because I've always find what difference everybody from a creative leader and a regular leader, like something like an operations leader, so on and so forth. Like, they look at business trends, their experience, data, and I think a lot of what a creative leader does is they need to inspire somebody. So you're taking all that, you're taking your intuition, you're taking your passion, and you're presenting that to your team and being like, hey, this is this business problem along top of some of these trends that are happening, but there's something I'm feeling is right for this, something that's brand new, and you have to inspire your team to want to do their best work to create this unique solution. And sometimes that's quite hard when you're thinking about these tight deadlines. And it's a lot of pressure put on you, but at the same time, it's actually quite exciting because you're able to promote and get the best work out of your team to really do something that could eventually even make a great impact.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Just to add to that, and you and I have had this conversation, that we've talked about the definition of a creative director, and they have to be someone who can jump in and do the work better and faster at the drop of a hat. And it doesn't mean you always do that. You just have to have the ability to do that. And I think that's an important balance as you go up in leadership ranks, that you still need to be able to dive in both for the deliverable that needs to be met, but also respect within your team. And I think that it doesn't mean that you should be doing that all the time, because that can end in an odd imbalance. But I think there's something about still maintaining your ability to jump in when needed.
Mm-hmm.
It goes a long way.
Anything to add?
Sure. Great question, by the way. But, multiple things to keep in mind, I think, over the years that may not necessarily have to do with the career aspect, but there's this notion that where there's no vision, people perish. And what I mean by that is, as a leader, you really have to foster and protect the vision for the project, but understanding your team's strengths, weaknesses, and really being able to serve them every step of the way. You're able to protect the integrity of the big idea and fight for it all the way down to the end. I think that process, by having a genuine interest in your team, that's what divides, in my opinion, a great leader versus just a good leader that is more focused on the end result and making sure that everything is billable and we're making the money that we need. But
Thank you. Okay, so we just talked about this a little bit, the ability to dive in at the last minute and kind of save a project or coach your team to the finish line when things are getting a little sweaty. I can imagine as leaders, your days are full of admin responsibilities, and it's tough to stay in a creative mindset all the time. The more layers of complexity that gets added on top of the creative. What do you do to stay creative? How do you keep your own skills sharp? Do you feel like they are sharp, or are you leaning on your team a little bit more for that? And then on top of that, do you think it's necessary to know the skills that your team has? Can you direct without actually understanding exactly the intricacies of what they're doing? Because I know even for me, losing control of not being able to dive into all the programs and do it myself, it's really tough sometimes. And how do you guys conquer that? So lots of questions there. I'd say firstly, how do you stay creative and in the mindset and keep yourself positive every day with all those other responsibilities? Start with you.
I think a couple of things that I typically keep in mind is that those disruptions or process are always going to be there. So starting the day with understanding that that's going to be there kind of helps you navigate through those last minute fires or ankle biters, like people call them, in order to get it done. When I mentioned earlier about understanding people's strengths, depending on the deadline, you know who is going to rely and perform better on their specific project. So over the years, you learn to trust in what the different team member can bring to the table in order to get everything done at once. So you don't have to do everything, but instead just rely on a team. And I think that trust and that the team will get everything done, it really helps create a stronger bond with everybody. Regarding how to stay inspired, as you mentioned, I think that self-growth is important. And over the years, trying to find things to get involved in, even if it's outside of the building, and by meeting other people or other artists or trying different medias or things like that can really help kind of keep a fresh perspective and a good pulse on the culture and what's going on outside of the walls, and that can definitely influence your work.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So Kelly, how do you keep your skills sharp and maintain your creativity with all of the additional responsibilities you have?
Yeah, no, you posed a good question. I shouldn't have taken that snickerdoodle that I just did. Thank you, CSCA. I think we all have our go-to sources of where we're looking for inspiration and where we're finding them. I think the one where I'm at now is we've tried to put in a system where one of my teams has done this where there's a lot of share, that we make quick, accessible, easy ways for everyone to deposit right? We have a couple different Instagram feeds that we're just a channel that we're just quickly posting, here's fun, here's why, and we create a space to have conversation around it. And I think that has been a big shift just in the past few years of really trying to formalize inspiration, spots on the server, or big decks, or big presentations, and I think that just held us up. And I think now the less formal and the more that you're facilitating conversation around some of those elements, I think that's how I get, because we're all pulling from different places, and if you can kind of have a quick place to share the best stuff, I think that's where I pull it from. We also have just put in place that you can learn and stay inspired from each other, right? We all work with creatives, and so, thank you, as I'm dying up here, It was a good snickerdoodle, whoever made it at the bake sale table. Who did? Oh, it was Sasha, that was good. I think it's also interesting we try to set up in just even really simple, small, learning from each other, little presentations, like something quick. Again, not in the past, we've had these big formal things, but my team now has every other Friday, there's just a 20-minute, like kind of just quick grab coffee and learn from each other. And I think that's also the best place to get inspiration from the people you're around every day.
Mm-hmm.
So it's funny. If you ever hear my wife talk about me constantly trying to digest content, that's kind of the biggest thing I do. I always keep my ear to the ground. I'm always searching and looking, because I try to keep a repository in my brain. Not only because for what Jeremy was saying in those rough hours, like what is the one idea that can take something from good or mediocre to something that's great? And then sometimes you're like in the back of my head, like I remember something that reminds me of this problem that can really help us here. So I like to keep doing that, and the other side of that, my wife hates me because she'd be talking to me. I'm looking at my phone, and she's like, "What are you doing? I just asked you what you want for dinner." But no, I can't help it. And then on the other side of it, like I'm constantly learning. That's something I like to tell my team a lot. Like, do not just continue to do your craft over and over again. Get out, do something different, do something weird. Like recently, I was telling my team I learned to be a carpenter, and I actually tried to learn how to make the perfect chocolate chip cookie. Haven't figured it out yet, but I'm gonna have to try it. But I try to do certain things to like completely stretch my creativity a different way that's not necessarily in my craft, just so I can change the way I think about how I solve problems when I get back. So.
How about in your role now? Are you still designing at all? Do you jump into projects or assign yourself projects when your team gets full? So,
the way my role works at RGA, I'm hands-on a lot, and I lead a lot, which is it's a double-edged sword. A lot of times what I do is I take on a concept next to my team.
Great.
So, and I do that because I like to lead by example. So whatever they're doing, whatever they're struggling with, I want to be there with them. So therefore, any type of things that pop up, I can answer their questions and help foster some of their idea generations.
Mm-hmm. So you're not swooping at the end all the time. You're along with them. No.
Sometimes I'm there in the 3 a.m. trying to figure out like what is that idea.
Yeah, true story. Kelly, are you writing too?
Yeah, that's funny. Just we're trying to do some big brand awareness campaigns, and there's a bunch of teams, and a creative director and I took a concept, and then it's the same thing. Then you can understand some of the messaging challenges. You can understand, wow, this use of color actually doesn't work in a big billboard format like we thought it would. Maybe print is a terrible idea, and we would only have arrived at that if we had been doing it at the same time. Now, that can go down a slippery slope of if I did that every time, then I wouldn't have the opportunity to do more high-level thinking. And so it's I think on us to be really careful about what we do get into and make sure it's the right project and that it's spread out over time, or that you're jumping in and then staying at a high level. Mm-hmm. Because we are all leaders to our groups, but we're also reporting up to somebody else, and that's not what they're counting on us to do.
Mm-hmm. Jeremy, are you designing too?
I am designing too.
Mm-hmm.
And regarding inspiring the team, I think those projects that I get involved in and continue designing, it's fun to find ways to disrupt the process and bring the designers along. I think that the results can be really nice. We had a color strategy recently for a product that we're launching, and just to give you an example, it's instead of just being in the building looking at Pantone books, I brought the guys to the museum. We got to meet with fashion designers and interior designers who, just because they're thinking different about how to put color combinations together. And when we went back to the office, all the designers felt energized, and they were part of something greater than just that. And we found something interesting too, that regarding inspiring the team. Started this drawing session on Fridays at noon, and beyond just doing live drawing, we started noticing that the account people are joining also, and it's allowing the team to just share stories, ask questions, get to know each other a little better, and that was kind of neat.
Still Life? You guys
Still
do that?
Life, yeah. We usually ask for a volunteer
At
to
noon on Fridays?
sit down as a model.
I'm going to be there.
You're welcome to come, yeah.
Antonio, you're going to drive a little south? Yeah.
All
let's
right.
do it. Kelly,
That's
if
great.
you can somehow get out of your obligations. Okay,
Neat.
that's awesome.
But I'd like to stay involved in creating the work as well. So.
Yeah, so we just kind of talked through, that was my next question actually. Any fun practices you've incorporated into your day-to-day, that's on Friday specifically, but how do you rally your teams or encourage creative thinking, get people unstuck? Are there any exercises you do or anything you've done for the workplace environment that set that up so that it's a better environment to be creative in, especially understanding the different industries that you work in? Like where you are, the creative department might be set up differently than a bunch of people who are doing research or strategy or things like that.
That's a good question, and I think for us, understanding the parameters of each project, since the pharma industry is so regulated, that kind of helps people have a mental strategy and how to develop great creative through that. But in order to keep them inspired, as I mentioned in the case study earlier, that finding disruptive ways to create the artwork or the pieces that we're developing, it has good results. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, speaking from another highly regulated industry, I found that a lot of creatives often have kind of their go-to sources for inspiration. I think where we've been more successful is making sure they have the information and finding out, okay, what is there, if it's on my team, they have some questions, let's get a data scientist in here who can really describe how the inner workings of how they built this product or this algorithm or what they were trying to do. And I found that when we make those connections happen, it's kind of stepping outside of the creative zone and more into the problem we're trying to solve, that we arrive at a better solution.
Mm-hmm. And then, yeah, Antonio, anything you've been, okay, doesn't work. Hello? Oh, good, works now. Anything you've done in the environment of your creative team or special efforts you've put toward keeping them motivated?
Yeah, so what I didn't share is that I work 100% remote with RGA, and that actually creates a little bit of interesting ways of working that you have to be more creative to kind of spark the inspiration there. So what was developed is this thing called Creative Leaps, and it's what we want to do to try to elevate the thinking. And we don't want, at least our copywriters and our designers to rely too heavily on their aesthetics or things that they think are great. You have to actually look at the strategy and think, okay, what are we actually trying to solve? What's the problem? And then how do we make sure the aesthetics, the ideas serve to solve that problem? So what it is, it's a 24-hour exercise, and we like to challenge our team and even ourselves, like what is the idea written in one sentence? And then what does it look like? What's the brand mark? And then try to ladder up to that idea. And if you can't describe it in one sentence, it's not a good idea. It should be super simple and it should have a lot of legs to express itself. So it's something we try to do. And actually, it actually creates a lot of ideas. We have a lot of great discussions. And I think that actually starts the train of inspiration that keeps the project going.
Mm-hmm. Good. Okay, now this is a really fun category, hiring. I'm sure we've all been there trying to bring the right people to the table and build our teams. Kelly, I'll start with you. What's the best advice that you have to people here
I'm the
today?
oldest, I've hired the most. I see where you're going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a struggle, right? Like we want to work with the best people,
Yeah.
but sometimes the best people aren't accessible, or maybe they're jerks, but their portfolio's really good. And how do you decide? Like, does mean win? So it's tough. What should we be considering when we're trying to make these hires? A killer portfolio, personality above all. Like, what do you look to?
I think the biggest thing within creative hiring for me is is the confidence to shoot for the very best candidate. I think as creatives, you go through and you meet a lot of really interesting, great people, and they have a pretty good portfolio, and then you think, okay, I think this could work, instead of holding your standards higher and going further and going for someone out of market and bringing them in, or going for that, waiting to just find the very right person. And I think it's restraint to, because it's so hard to look at a portfolio and then think, how will it apply to this setting and this job? And I think that's, other industries, it's more of a direct correlation between, you did that job here, you will do that job now at this place. And I think it's making sure that you're not hiring with fingers crossed, I think this will work. Because I think then further down the road, you always run into, or you find the candidate that would have been perfect. And I think that's when you think, man, we'd be a year ahead of where we are in developing this team, or this product would have been positioned better if I had just held out.
Right, like you say, you don't want to cross your fingers saying, I think this would, you don't want them crossing their fingers either, right? So you want to be equally confident on both sides. Any mistakes you've made along the way, or surprises that have happened with either really bad hires or a hire you weren't sure about that, turned into a really great associate?
Yeah, I've hired this guy once. I'm one day going to hire him again.
Best portfolio ever.
Yeah. I think, I don't know about mistakes, but our chief people officer said to me for a role that we recently had, she said, who's the very best person in the country? And I thought, well, I don't know who that is, but I was thinking, I'm like, I know the best person in Columbus that I would want for this, but they just took this big job, and I couldn't imagine, they were 3 weeks in, and I thought, well, I'll just write her, and I wrote to her and kind of explained, and I thought, and in the end, she ended up coming and has totally transformed a part of my team, and I think, why did I hesitate? So I think mistakes I've made in the past is probably hesitating and think, oh, I could never get that person, or they wouldn't be interested in this role. Mm-hmm. It turns out they often are.
So Jeremy, for you, any sort of North Stars you look to when hiring, or any advice you'd have for people out there when they're looking for a good candidate? And is that part of your role? Are you trying to fill your team?
It is not always part of my role, but I do get the opportunity to look at portfolios. We have a HR department that things get filtered through at GSW. However, with that said, I often like engaging in conversation, and I like to hear if that person has a specific skill that can add to the company vision. I think that shows a genuine interest. That, hey, we want to be here to help this place make a better place. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I like seeing sketchbooks too, for those of you who are creative, I'm more interested in the process and how you think than the portfolio, because in cases past, we have seen some great portfolios, but
I think that's a big shift. I'll add to that too. The way often that we hire, the portfolio, I feel like isn't as much as it once was, and it's more in real time. The way we interview is sharing problems and actually asking them to kind of sketch out a solution or how they might solve it. Mm-hmm. That weighs more than the work.
Mm-hmm.
I'll add in a little bit. In the brand transformation team of where I work, it's a hard time trying to find the right candidate, because you have people who are good at branding, but they're not good at systematic thinking. And you have good people who are look at systematic thinking, but they don't understand branding. And what we try to do is try to find that right characteristics, positivity, determination, eager to learn, and actually understand their thinking of how to solving problems. Because a lot of times we start to find that these portfolios that don't completely align up to what we're trying to offer, they have the best ingredients to make the best candidate. Like I recently hired someone right out of college, and she came with a portfolio that potentially wouldn't align to our asks or our jobs, but honestly, she's like one of the best performers I've ever seen. And she's done great work, and it's a lot of times it just challenges us to think. She was an intern. She was an intern, and then bringing her as an intern, we got to see how she applied her thinking to what we were doing, and it was amazing. And I've made some mistakes of hiring people with wonderful portfolios that had iffy things about the personality, and I wish I would have stuck to my gut and just said, I'm going to pass this candidate. Because it eventually just brought down the team, and I just at some point in time we had to split ways because it wasn't working, even though how talented they were.
I think we've all been there. Okay, so this one's sort of fun. I think as we've sort of transcended through our careers and such, we remember little bits of advice that we've heard from people that have kind of stuck with us. And I'm just interested in the best advice that you've heard and kind of retained over time that pushes you, that you, even in moments of, I don't even want to call it crises, but where things are getting hot or sweaty, and that sort of motivational thinking of sorts would come out in you, and you're like, I remember when someone told me this once. Like, what's the best advice that you were ever given that you feel like you use yourself, but you also pass on to your team? And it can be from your mother. It doesn't have to be.
Yeah, I'm thinking there's several things that come to mind, or mentors that I had growing up. My grandfather used to say, I'm going to say it in Spanish, meta mano que del pendejo no se ha escrito nada. And that, in other words, he used to say, hey, don't be afraid to go and do it, because nothing has ever been written about people that never tried. So that was kind of the translation. But it kind of gave me permission to go out into the world and just try things and push for it and learn from the journey. So that has been a fun thing.
I love that.
It's personal to my heart, because I remember once I was told that you have to change the narrative in order to push forward, and you have to change and not let the negativity take over you, because it can continue to destroy you. And the reason why that stuck to me in my career is a lot of times when I would join companies, I would either be the only person in my role that looks like me, or the only person in the company that looks like me. And that to me spoke volumes, because it became something that it felt like it held me back. But that's because I was looking at it in the negative. And what I had to do was change the narrative. Like, this is something that I need to think positively about. And if I have the confidence, and I can breathe confidence in myself to be able to make the right choices and trust my intuition, trust that I'm here for a reason, and I'm paving the way for other individuals who don't necessarily see me, then potentially it's going to be something for the better. And I think if I let the negativity hold me back, it would eventually eat my confidence, it would eventually eat my skills, and I would never trust myself. And that's a lot of things I like to bring, at least talk to people about, is just like, don't pay attention to all the negatives. The negatives are always going to be there. But if all you do is look at them, at some point in time, they're going to take over everything you're going to deliver.
I had an old boss that told me once, be careful about being so nice, people will think you're dumb. And so that wasn't advice or inspiration. And I wrote an article in Ad Age years ago about Midwest agencies versus coast agencies, and I said I will die proving that man wrong. So I think I've held up my end of that bargain.
Wonderful. So I always go over time, and people always look at the clock and tap their watches, and they're like, Jen, come on, you gotta, and we have a lot of time left, so I'm trying to figure out if we should open it up to the crowd and see if you guys have any questions for our panel. You're welcome to ask me questions. I can't promise I came prepared, but actually I'm gonna give the one bit of advice, and I was telling Kelly this the other day, because this actually has stuck with me, and I pass this on to everyone who I can see struggling. I think that one of the most overwhelming things about being a creative is looking at the possibilities of the what if and just freaking out, because it's such this vast space of what ifs, right? And then how do you get started? You have this like crazy scope of work you're trying to get through, or this list of things you have to get done, and it's just so overwhelming because you want it to be the very best, but how do you even start? And Kelly, actually, she helped me break it down into pieces, and something she's always said to me is, Jen, bird by bird. And like, bird by bird, and she's like, yeah, like one step at a time. Like, make a list and tackle it, like start at the beginning. You can't get from A to Z starting at M, right? Like, you gotta start at A. And so it just really does help me when I start freaking out. I am the queen of lists. I don't know about you guys, but I have probably way too many lists in a stack on my desk. Like, I'm sure a lot of you do too, but the bird by bird thing really helps me, because you're not going to get to the finish in one day, and so by looking at it as a process and tackling it one step at a time really helps break it down. And I think that's something that I've helped a lot of younger creatives who are trying to prove themselves out of school or earlier in their career stop from freaking out and only seeing the deadline and not realizing that, step into it with confidence, knowing that you've got what it takes inside to do it, and just help them get there from beginning to end.
For reference, I love that Jen, I forgot that until you mentioned that the other day. There's an Anne Lamott book titled Bird by Bird, and the opening of the book, she talks about a childhood memory she has that her younger brother was supposed to have done a report on a different species of bird every week of the school year, and it turns out he hadn't started it until the night before the last day of school. As creatives, I'm sure none of you can relate to any of that. And so she just remembers her dad sitting down with her brother at the kitchen table and saying, all right, let's just take this bird by bird, right? Let's get where we can get. And so I love that phrase and the simplicity of everything that it means.
I've even said it in client meetings to clients, because they'll look at me and be like, how are we going to get this done? Or they just start freaking out over the massive things that have to get completed. And it just comes out now. It's like part of how I say things, I'm like bird by bird. And they're just weird, but like it's good advice. So are we going to pass the mic around maybe? You guys can be loud enough, right? Do you need the mic? Does anyone have enough energy to stand up and yell a question to the panel? Hey, I see a hand. Stand up and yell a question to the panel.
Hi. I have a question for Kelly. I'm a copywriter. I'm just interested in your you don't see a lot of, at least in town, a lot of creative directors as a copywriter with the ratios. I was wondering if you could talk to that a little bit about whether you think your experience is a little different than that or how you work.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. If you couldn't hear, it was about, I'm the solo copywriter up here. And it's interesting, when I first moved to Columbus and took the role at Ology, this was about 13 years ago, it was a company of incredible design talent, but the concept and kind of the maturity of where a lot of that talent was, the art of concepting and distillation of what the single idea was that Antonio was talking about, and being able to articulate that in lots of different tones, not just, how sometimes you can see work and you just know, oh, that comes from the same agency or small firm or person, it always has the same tone. The ability to switch those tones, that hadn't been formed yet. And Ology is a good example of a firm that a fair amount of leaders there are writers, because they are champions of the concept. And that's everything I've seen. It's whether you're a visual designer or a copywriter, that if you really understand the heart of a concept and can articulate that, particularly to clients, then that's how you will rise up. I always think it's a good sign when you're joining a place if there's a good balance of creative leaders who are writers and designers, because that means there's a solid understanding of the tension between those two. It means that, and I don't proclaim to have amazing visual design skills in any sorts, but it also means at least understanding aesthetic and how to talk about it and how to identify it. So shoring up those ends of your skill sets. And I can identify a good visual partner when they're a great read on content and copy and concept too.
Yeah, actually, to add to that real quickly, that's what I was going to say, is you rise the ranks as a creative leader, you have to have both sets of skills. So you have to understand what a good concept is, obviously, but the writing behind that and how you want the brand expressed verbally, along with how you want it to look visually, they need to go hand in hand, because the personality is twofold, right? And so a good creative leader who has a writing background has to understand aesthetically what they want things to look like, and a good creative leader who has a visual background has to understand how they want that brand or concept to sound. And I had a writer once who I was not too fond of look at me and say, now you can make it look pretty, because I did all the work. And I don't go postal often, but she got a look of death, and I was pretty pissed, because it's like, come on, we're on a team, like we're in this in tandem together. And so I think as you start growing into leaders, understanding how both work together is really important.
And being humble enough to say when, all right, this is about, let's grab someone else, right? That I don't feel comfortable making these design decisions. I'm going to grab someone who I feel comfortable can make the right one.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else? Big questions?
Yeah, this question's for Antonio. So you talked about how you started off with a degree in fine arts, and you have now moved into brand transformation and strategy. Could you walk us through kind of your journey? Was it intentional to move into that direction? Was it a sort of skill sets that then led you there? How did you get to that?
It's a good question. It's funny. So when I started as a fine artist and a painter, honestly, and be 100% truthful, the reason what brought me from painting to advertising was my now wife. So when I first met her and I told her like, hey, I'm a painter, and she was like, no, that doesn't make money. So I was like, okay, cool.
That is awesome.
It's okay. I still got time to change my major. Since she's my wife now. So I changed over to advertising, and I brought a lot of those skills over, like creative thinking and so on and so forth. So right out of college, I joined Ology with Kelly, and that actually introduced me a lot to branding and brand thinking, brand concepts, how copywriting and visual come together to articulate companies and their problems and essentially bring that to life. And I really kept that inside of me, and that's honestly that was my groundwork for my career. And from there, I just jumped straight into big site designs, digital marketing campaigns, and so on and so forth. I had a lot of that as a background in between, my first in my career all the way up to 3 years ago working at RGA. And what I started to do when I think about product design, digital marketing, big site designs, what I always held on to was like trying to tell that story, trying to solve that problem. How do you bring both of the skills together? And that was something I actually spoke to my creative director, or my ECD now, about what we can do to bring that to life. So things like solving problems for Verizon and how they can speak to millennials better. It's a mixture of digital products and brand. You have to tell a story and give them something to believe in. And it's that intermix that truly propelled the way we actually started to develop this service for RGA.
I think she was right. I think you did okay.
She's always right.
They're still together and they have 3 children, so it worked out okay. And he works from home, and his wife is a full-time mom at home. I don't know how they make it work, but he says it's amazing, so I agree with him. Any hands? Oh, good. Mm-hmm.
Kelly, I believe you had mentioned earlier that you had a lot of experience with in-house, and how there's challenges with getting your in-house team or higher-ups to agree with whatever vision you have for the company. Can you talk a little bit about tips of how to make them get on board with whatever your ideas are?
Yeah, tenacity. In my current role, so yeah, I was in-house at Martha Stewart for 7-8 years. Then I was at Ology in an agency setting for 11 years, and now at Root, it's an in-house team, which our creative team is probably about 20 people, and that everything, because it's in a sea of one of these kids is not like the other, the creatives, right? I'm surrounded by people with PhDs in math, right? They do not understand, they almost don't even see the value. I have to use data points currently to prove. I have to look at a handful, so we're spending millions and millions of dollars every month on Facebook and Google ads, for example. And I can tell you these ads that I don't deem as good type, good color, interesting animation, solid concept, they're performing well. And so I'm constantly ticking away at them to prove that the teams can make better work that I feel is good, a good piece of creative work that performs, and that over time it will deliver. And I'm having to do that with data points. I'm having to do that with research. I'm also having to argue why we even need to hire more consumer insights and research, but making sure I can show, hey, our brand awareness number went up in these 5 cities. And I think that's because we're putting out stuff that sticks with them longer, or there's some piece of creative that are advancing our brand versus some that are performing right on the spot and turning into new customers. So in my current role, and at my company, it's data and it's measurement, because that's who my audience is, and that's what they'll believe. We A/B test everything, we ABC test everything, and I think that can quickly show when I'm onto something. If something's performing well, I think, okay, this performed well, so will you let me then try this, or can I try this? Or I really have a strong hypothesis that playing into these specific thoughts, or we did some consumer research and know that they don't trust us, so let me do a trust campaign. I think I can move the needle on that. And so it's little nuggets of numbers that kind of add up to a bigger push.
I just had a question to all of you guys. All of you guys are somewhat of like a minority. Has there been a lot of like challenges? You know, you came from Puerto Rico, woman, you were saying being the only person that looks like you. Has there been challenges of people taking you seriously, having to move to different companies because you don't feel comfortable, or has there been a lot of like roadblocks for you in these leadership positions because of that?
I actually have been really lucky with that. I mean, there have been things that I had to tweak, understanding the audience that I was talking to. For example, earlier in my career, we're just loud when we talk and present, and we use our hands. That's a part of my culture. And I remember my boss pulling me aside and telling me at the time, hey, you know, you're being perceived as you're angry. It's like, no, I'm just passionate about what I'm doing, man. I mean, I stayed up till 3 a.m. creating this thing, right? So over the years, I kind of learned to pick up on little things like that. But overall, I think, you know, Central Ohio here is a phenomenal place for people. There's a lot of opportunities, and just hope that answers that. Yeah.
I think it's a challenge that's not really talked about. Like the fact that a lot of companies in the industry are not that diverse is actually a challenge. It's a psychological thing that makes people feel like if somebody doesn't look like me, who's above me, I can never reach there. That's one thing. And then I also have a story, and I remember talking to a client. It's a really profitable client. I remember presenting them a campaign that had an interracial couple. And I remember the lead client get on the phone and was like, the campaign is great, and this is wonderful, but I will say the photo, we're not quite ready for that. And then my first response was, ready for what? And they're like, the room got super quiet. Everybody looked at me. I'm like, I'm just uniquely curious. What are you not ready for? And then like they had to explain themselves. And I realized this is not an aggressive way of going about it. Sometimes you just have to call out some things that are just not right. And I'm okay if somebody, you know, wants to say something to me about it, or we can talk about it, but in reality, there's nothing wrong with that. Like, there's nothing wrong with what we're trying to produce. You're a company who speaks to the military, who has diverse demographic. You can put an interracial couple together. So, yeah.
I think just from a female perspective, I have been fortunate enough to I've worked for some very strong women. I mean, I started working out for Martha Stewart. I mean, she's the toughest there is. If I survive that, I can get through anything. Ology is female-owned too, but I think part of that is that you can find places where you see leadership that you feel is worth mimicking. I mean, hands down, it's still, you know, all the studies that show. I know for a fact I make less than I would if I had been really commanding and had traits that are often affiliated with male, to ask for raises and at different points in promotions at different points in my career. But I think it's on all of us, and I think all four of us take this seriously too, that the people that we're hiring below us, that we have a stronger sense of making sure that everyone's represented in that. I just got there's about 50 people in my 4 teams, and I just got from our head of people my report on how I hit on gender and ethnicity diversity, and I thought I was doing pretty good, and I still have a long way to go. And I totally admit that, and am committed to changing that.
Thanks for doing that. I do have a funny story that came to mind, because my response usually is with humor, which helps me deal with things. I was heading to a meeting in the 3rd floor, and I have been a vice president in our company for, 12 years or so. So I'm in the lobby, and a young account executive looks at me and she says, hey, is my car ready? And I say, what do you mean? Is your car ready? She's like, you're with the car detailing place, right? And it took me, at first I thought, no, I work here. She's like, you work here? It's like, yeah, I do. Like for 15 years. and
I cleaned your car at lunch for you.
So, yeah, I didn't know what to think, but it became a joke around the floor. So some of my designers were leaving me their keys and my keyboard. It's like, hey man, when you're after lunch, when my car's ready. But you know, again, you just have to laugh and things like that. Yeah.
That's real life.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
You wouldn't have laughed?
You would have taken the car and joyride. Pop a few cookies.
Any others?
Oh yeah, over here.
It's really blinding up here. We seriously can barely see anything.
Can you guys share a story about somebody who showcased creative leadership that was under you, and maybe as a result of that, you were able to give them more responsibility? I kind of struggle with being somebody who's at an employee level. I really want to show off my creative leadership and things that I've learned, but there's not that many opportunities that kind of jump out at you.
Sure. That is an amazing question, and we typically look on a day-to-day basis with the projects that need to be done. There's every once in a while people with really good drives that are willing to take opportunities and go beyond what is being asked, and leadership looks at that. So those are good attitude to have towards being promoted and being noticed.
There's something I like to call like Ask Plus. I'm not asking my designers to do more work, but a lot of times when I assign certain things or if I ask for certain things, you can either do exactly what I ask, or if there's a certain way you're thinking about it that's actually different to how I'm directing you, just go ahead and do it. And I think that's something that I know personally I started to want to do, is that a lot of times it's hard to express your leadership when you're under somebody's direction, because you're basically laddered up to maybe a couple layers of management. And I think it's the small elements to assert yourself is where you should take advantage of. And it's okay if you don't have the answers. Sometimes it's the right question that gets people to look at your leadership. And sometimes it's just a different take on what the direction you were given that's shown your leadership. So just try to find a lot of those small moments to really look at it and just try to express your leadership in that way.
Yeah, actually, if I can add to that really quickly, that reminds me, I think the best collaborations you can have as a leader with someone who's on your team is, it's pretty stressful being in charge of a project and knowing that all that rolls up to you and then you have to present it and you're responsible for any output, right? And it's also pretty stressful being the one who always has to come up with the ideas if your team isn't coming to the table with them as well, but at the end of the day, that's pretty much what your role is to inspire your team, and if they're feeling a void, you have to come. So often it's like, okay, we can do this, concept A, concept B, here's how I see it. The best feeling ever is when you're in a creative review and someone comes to the table with something where you're like, I didn't even think about it, transforming into that direction, but it's so much better because you thought about it further than I had the chance to. That's the inkling of someone who is like ready to, they have that creative spirit behind them, and they're willing to, and just instead of just being a doer, they're being more of a thinker. And I think that when you can work with someone who's adding value because they're going a step beyond, they're helping out the project overall, and the weight is off our shoulders as much because we look at that person as a partner rather than someone we have to tell what to do. And so that's super rewarding. And then the other thing too is just demeanor. So there's that fight or flight mentality, right? And I'm sure we all feel it where we go into freak out mode in moments of stress. But I worked with a creative once who we were trying to get something out the door, and he sat behind me and he was directing me because we just had to get it done. And I'm like, dude, you can sit back there all day long and direct me because just tell me what to do. He was so calm, and all I can think of the whole time was, man, this kid's going to be an incredible leader, because he had the state of mind and the presence to calm me down, because as a leader, you have to stay calm, but there's those moments where you're just going to be a little more transparent than you should be, right? And then you apologize later. But to have that person who actually, again, added value because they put themselves into the role of a leader and rose to that occasion, it was just super telling. And in the future state, he is a leader now. So if you put yourself into the role of being a leader in the moment instead of the role that you're being designated, and kind of think ahead of the game, I think that should get you really far.
Yeah, I'll echo the sometimes going out of your way to do things maybe that are outside of a skill set you're even comfortable with, and that's risky, right? You're probably going to mess up 4 of those before you knock the 5th one out. I can think of a long time ago, it was someone who was on the marketing team, and we were doing work, we were rebranding a university, and this person had happened to have gone to the university, and I just interviewed her, and I said, can you just tell me a little bit about your experience? And she had this interesting story, and we're on a deadline, and I'm trying to sift through and still figure out what the concept is, what the positioning should be, and I said, would you just mind writing this all down? And she delivered to me this 4-page, just this beautiful narrative and story. And I thought, wait a minute, her role had nothing to do with content. And I said, wait, could you write? Yeah, I think you can write. You should write. And then she's an art director today and has had a great writing career. She's still very young, but I think that's a good example. So she transitioned into writing, and it was really tough. But it took, someone she could have given me a single page of bullet points, and she didn't. She wrote this really, really striking story. The second example is more recently at Root, which I guess I should have explained. It's an app-based, we currently sell car insurance, but it's all based, it tracks how you drive in your phone. So our team of product designers that are designing the screens, right, their design focus, a problem-solving focus, and this particular designer noticed she was sitting near some people in the claims team, the people taking the calls, and she noticed that they didn't exactly have the best manner in some empathy situations, and she said something that I think they could really benefit from some empathy training, and I mean, which, yeah, they could have, but of course that's, we're a startup, we're growing so quickly, who's got time to figure that out? And so she put together a training for them and delivered it to their managers, and she's since been promoted because she has no business doing that and no background, and she sat there and knew that was a need and put together as best she could something that was quickly implemented because she had been so quick to make it. So those opportunities aren't always available, but you'd be surprised at how far they can kind of project you.
So time? You cutting us off? You guys were being cut off. So thank you. I told you I'd do it. I wanted to go over a couple minutes because that's pretty normal. But thank you, Jeremy, Kelly, and Antonio. We all love learning from each other, and we're lucky to have you. So thanks so much.